Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the newscast, Al-Qaeda's number 2 taken out, reportedly by Israel, inside Iran, and with the full support of the United States. A lot to unpack here. We've got all the breaking details coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. A major national security story broke over the weekend, and with all of the attention on the U.S. presidential election, you might have missed it. Al-Qaeda's second in command, Mohammed Al-Masri, was taken out, reportedly on Iranian soil and reportedly by Israeli agents with the full support of the United States. A lot of major players there, a lot to unpack. We're going to get into it today. Before I do, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Folks, we are bringing you the kind of cutting edge, timely information that you just won't hear anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media. A story like this, usually in a normal news cycle in previous years, would be the top headline, but it was covered for a day or two and then quickly brushed aside. But here's the good news. We are here to bring you all of the inside information on this very important event, the death of Al-Qaeda's number 2, Mohammed Al-Masri. One more quick thing before we do get into it. A big thank you to everyone. Hey, I announced, I believe about 2 weeks ago here on the newscast, that we passed 100,000 subscribers right here on our YouTube news channel. And now we have received from YouTube the legendary silver play button. You receive this when you pass that milestone of 100,000 subscribers. So this is very exciting. A big thank you to YouTube for giving us this great platform, and a big thank you to all of our subscribers. Folks, whether you've been with us from the very beginning or you just joined, you're a new subscriber, thank you. God bless you. And hey, we believe that God is expanding the Watchman News channel for such a time as this. The exciting thing is we are reaching an international audience with this very important message. The goal now is 1 million. So help us get there. Tell your friends, your family members, your neighbors, your coworkers to subscribe to the Watchman News channel. We think they will enjoy it. We've got a lot of important information coming up for you in the days, the weeks, the months to come. But let's start with today. Mohammed Al-Masri. Who is he? Number 1. Well, he was actually the number 2 for Al-Qaeda, one of the world's most vicious and notorious terrorist organizations, obviously behind the 9/11 attacks. Now, Mohammed Al-Masri, a guy with a very interesting history, originally from Egypt, but a long lineage of terror attacks. He was one of Al-Qaeda's master plotters in terms of being operational and plotting overseas terror attacks. I'll give you a few examples. The 1998 Africa embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. In August 1998, the U.S. embassies in both of those countries were struck by bomb attacks, terror attacks. Some 224 people were killed. Mohammed Al-Masri was the man behind those attacks back in 1998. They were kind of a precursor, I'm sad to say, along with the USS Cole attack in 2000. They were 2 major precursors or foreshadowings to what was to come, the 9/11 attacks. But Al-Masri was in kind of Al-Qaeda's inner circle, in their vanguard, going back over 20 years. So the 98 embassy bombings, that gave the United States, obviously, a reason to want him, and he was wanted. He was on the FBI's most wanted list for decades now, and there was a $10 million reward on the head of Mohammed Al-Masri. To show you what kind of importance he held in Al-Qaeda, his daughter was married to Osama bin Laden's son, Hamza bin Laden, who was killed last year, good riddance. But so he had deep family ties as well to Osama bin Laden through his daughter, through that marriage, and he was the next in line. Ayman al-Zawahiri is the current Al-Qaeda leader. You probably remember him after the 9/11 attacks. You would see footage of he and Osama bin Laden together, walking together, sitting around together, these videos Al-Qaeda would release. Well, after bin Laden's death in 2011, Zawahiri officially became Al-Qaeda's #1, but the problem for Al-Qaeda is he is rarely seen. Some people think he's dead or he's near death. If he's alive, he's very likely in the tribal regions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, that lawless area which has long been an Al-Qaeda hotbed. But we don't know if al-Zawahiri is even alive at this point. So Mohammed al-Masri, he was the #2 in the organization, a very important player, perhaps the successor to take over Al-Qaeda, this international terror organization, which has taken some serious hits over the years, obviously, in their leadership and kind of in their stature in the jihadist world. ISIS, back in 2013, 2014, 2015, really kind of took the mantle for the jihadi superstars, I guess you would say, where all of the young wannabe terrorists and jihadists around the world flocked to that black ISIS banner in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. And Al-Qaeda kind of took a back seat. There was even some fighting between Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and elsewhere. Al-Qaeda kind of lost their preeminence in the jihadist world. They've been down, but folks, they are not out. They are still very active in Africa, in Yemen, in Syria, and in other places around the world. So Mohammed al-Masri, as I mentioned, a very dangerous player who may very well have ascended to the top of a very dangerous organization, Al-Qaeda, with the blood of thousands and thousands on their hands, 3,000 Americans here on 9/11 alone. But al-Masri, I mentioned the 1998 embassy bombings. Now, at the time of his death, and we will give you details in a minute on that, but we need to give you the background on why this was such an important hit. At the time of his death, he was reportedly plotting attacks against Israeli targets and Jewish targets around the world. So perhaps an attack was imminent, which made his takeout, his death, even more pressing for Israel and for the United States, reportedly planning attacks against Israeli and Jewish targets. Going back, his track record includes also not only the 98 embassy bombings, which obviously gave the United States very good reason to want him, but in 2002 in Mombasa, Kenya, he was behind a terror attack on a hotel that killed 3 Israeli tourists. So Israel had very good reason to want al-Masri as well, not only for that attack, but for these pending attacks that he was behind. This was only reported the news over the weekend, as I mentioned, but apparently al-Masri was killed some 3 months ago, August 7th, 2020, in Iran. Now, you might say, why would Iran harbor an Al-Qaeda leader? How could he walk freely on the streets of Iran? Remember, Iran and Al-Qaeda, Shia and Sunni, they're supposed to be sworn enemies, right? Well, it's a little more complex than that. We'll get into it in a minute. But he was in Iran. Know that he'd been living in Iran for years. He was apparently in a sedan with his daughter, who was also a jihadi, who, as I mentioned, was married to Osama bin Laden's son. So al-Masri and his daughter were in a sedan together going down the street in Tehran, the Iranian capital, when reportedly up alongside their sedan pulled some motorcycles and they were taken out. They were shot and killed in their sedan. Now, the New York Times reported over the weekend that intelligence officials are saying, I presume Western intelligence officials are saying that Israeli agents were behind this. There are varying reports. Israeli TV reported on this as well and said it wasn't Israeli agents. They farmed it out to some allies inside Iran. We don't know. But the reporting on it so far has suggested that likely Israel took out al-Masri on Iranian soil and with the full backing. I don't know if there was logistical or any kind of backing like that when I say full support, but definitely with the urging and the nudging of the United States, according to these reports. And as I mentioned, I kind of outlined these attacks that al-Masri was involved in against Israeli targets, against U.S. targets, and still planning more in the days to come, God forbid. So apparently the United States and Israel came to an understanding that we need to do this now. Israel has assets, intelligence assets on the ground inside Iran, and Iran knows it, and they don't like it. And they've had egg on their face many, many times over the past few years. Think of the heist by the Mossad of Iranian nuclear program documents out of Tehran about 2 years ago. And remember, I mentioned that Al-Masri's death on a Tehran street happened in August, just over the summer. What did we report here on a consistent basis on the Watchman Newscast, June, July, and August? This series of explosions at sensitive Iranian nuclear and missile sites. I mean, folks, this happened for a good chunk of the summer, starting in the second half of June and stretching throughout July. It seemed that every other day there was some new report that an Iranian nuclear facility, like at Natanz, or an Iranian missile factory, an explosion occurred at these very sensitive and important sites, and no one could say who did it, but all suspicions obviously were that Israeli intelligence was behind these sabotage efforts on Iranian soil. And that had to give the Iranian regime a very uneasy feeling to know that time and time again, Israeli agents are successfully striking on Iranian soil against Iran's nuclear program, against its missile program, which is a whole other story, by the way, their ballistic missile program, how that's developing, very dangerous, and even Iranian nuclear scientists over the years who were taken out on the streets of Iran. And the interesting thing about that, I mentioned that someone reportedly pulled up beside Al-Masri's sedan on a motorcycle and took him out. That's exactly the pattern that we saw with the takeout of the Iranian nuclear scientist over the past several years. Someone would pull up beside them on a motorcycle and they were killed. So it seems that there's a very good chance that Israel did carry out this assassination of Mohammed al-Masri and his daughter. The United States also obviously had very good reason to want this man dead, but Iran's not saying anything. They are trying to cover this up as much as they can and say, hey, it wasn't al-Masri, and they're trying to be mum on it because, number one, again, it's an embarrassment for the Iranian regime that the Zionist entity, the little Satan, their greatest enemy, Israel, next to the United States, Iran's one of their greatest enemies, Israel, is operating freely and carrying out sabotage on Iranian soil. Big embarrassment for the mullahs. Okay, that's one point. Second point, Sunni Shia. Why was al-Masri living inside Iran? He's a Sunni, Al-Qaeda is Sunni, Iran is Shia, obviously. Iran has been facing off against the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the battlefields over the past few years in Syria and Iraq, who are Sunni terror organizations. So how were Al-Qaeda operatives and leaders living on Iranian soil? Well, al-Masri apparently entered Iran in 2003. Now, they were in Afghanistan, obviously, and in the tribal regions was Al-Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But several Al-Qaeda leaders, including bin Laden's son, Hamza bin Laden, found safe passage and safe harbor inside Iran for years now, nearly 2 decades. Why would Iran do this? Well, think about it, folks. Iran has no hesitation in working with Sunni terror organizations. I bring you Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. 2 of Iran's most lethal proxies are Sunni. Also, the Taliban in Afghanistan. Iran has worked with them as well over the years. The Taliban is also Sunni. Hey, at the end of the day, yes, they have theological differences, even strategic differences. They may go about their vision of global domination in a different way, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And hey, Iran sees eye to eye with these Sunni terror organizations when it comes to the great Satan, the United States, and the little Satan, Israel. They share a lot when it comes to killing Christians and Jews. So there you have it. It's not really hard to unpack that, why they would work together. Al-Qaeda on Iranian soil. Also, you could see Iran saying, hey, if we're harboring some of their leadership, including Osama bin Laden's son, they won't strike us. This is kind of the ultimate bargaining chip here to have Al-Qaeda in Iranian custody. Also, Iran could unleash these Al-Qaeda operatives to carry attacks out across the world. Apparently, Mohammed al-Masri was living inside Iran, but was permitted to travel. I'm sure they were treated like kings on Iranian soil. Al-Masri was permitted to travel, yet he always came back to Iran where he had safe harbor. I believe it's been very successful to up the sanctions on the Iranian regime, to designate the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps as a terrorist organization, to take out Soleimani, the world's arch-terrorist, and to keep the pressure on. I hope that continues. But Israel also in Syria, pushing Iran back and doing everything to prevent them from establishing a foothold. So the Iranian regime has been on its heels a bit over the past several months. Again, this is a sea change from what we saw before the Trump administration. So we hope that continues. And hey, if we have any more details on the death of Mohammed Al-Masri and the fate of Ayman al-Zawahiri as well, it'd be nice to know if he's dead or alive. With all the blood he has on his hands, we will continue to bring you those updates right here on the Watchman News channel. Thanks for joining us today. Again, thanks for subscribing. Tell everyone about us and click that notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.